Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another artist chat on JoyceStream. This week, we're joined by Stephen Petronio, whose company was meant to have their 24th, 25th season,
25th.
25th season at the Joyce this May. So, Stephen, I don't know, I just introduced you, so I don't know if you have to introduce yourself.
No, it's opening night. Tonight is actually would have been opening night. And I've been performing at the Spring most of my adult career. Uh, and so it's very bittersweet day to not be preparing and not getting nervous and stressed out and excited.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we're doing this. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Well, it's become a kind of, it's like the weather starts changing and you start thinking about the Petronio season. It's always been a part of the winter into spring transition, sometimes with deep snow on gala night. So American Landscapes premiered last spring at Skirball, and we were going to see it again at the Joyce. Can you tell us a little bit about where it sits in terms of the work that you've made leading up to this? I feel like when I saw it at Skirball, I remember talking to you about it afterwards and just saying how connected I felt it was to Hardness 10, and that it felt like you were in this multi-piece, multi-year space of contemplation around the American moment, though that is so layered and there are many moments within. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about where you were approaching it?
Yeah, sure. So Hardness 10, for those of you who don't know, was the piece the previous year. And it was made on the tail of the election of the current president. And so that was quite a devastating moment for many of us, including myself. And so my only response, I didn't have any words to or moves or ideas to actually address the confusion I was feeling politically and emotionally. So I made the most pristine abstract thing that I could do, and I based it on the cut of a diamond, and it was called Hardness 10. Hardness 10 refers to the gemological hardness of the stone, and 10 being the highest. So I made something hard, and what I was hoping would be brilliant in response. And then a couple of years later, I began to go into the studio, and I felt like that now I have some interest in making something that feels and smells a little bit more like what I'm seeing around me. And I basically make abstract work that's got an expressive heart underneath it. And so, when I say the work is about something, I'm using these images of America and what I'm seeing in America in a very motivational way, but they're not representational. But if you look at the work, it travels from the audience's perspective, from the right to the left. And I was thinking a lot about going from the East Coast to the West Coast as a kind of an American, into the future, into the unknown, into the endless resources of a new country. So that was kind of the American pathway that I was looking at. So I modeled everything to travel in that direction in the first part of the piece, and then at the end it flips around and goes back east.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I felt it was really imperative to do was to try and be less abstract with these ideas. So I called Robert Longo, who is the most amazing visual artist. We're from the same generation. His work is, he does these very realistic charcoal renderings of current things that are in the current visual world of our culture. And so, and he was the first artist I ever purchased. I bought a work of his as a young dancer. When I was a young dancer, I went to the kitchen benefit, and for $50 you could buy a poster of that, a printed poster that Robert Longo made of one of the Women in the City. So so I bought one. It was $50. It almost broke my bank. I didn't eat that week, and I still have it hanging on my wall upstairs. And so I've loved, I've gone through a long life with Robert and his work, and the work he's doing now is so brilliant. So he's been doing these crazy. I mean, they look like photographs, but they're giant charcoal renderings of the riots in Ferguson and football players taking a knee. And I decided to group the visuals in three groups, and so the piece starts in a very pastoral way in a forest, and so he has these incredible nature images, and this is all projected, by the way, on the stage. And so it almost looks like you're going into like a ballet world of some, the beautiful forest, and then it moves into severely poignant political depictions like Ferguson, the riots in Ferguson, and then in the end it goes back to natural things that are decomposing. So I was really I asked him to call to mind for the audience both the beauty and wonder, or all three, the beauty and wonder, the political strife, and the environmental degradation that we're experiencing. And so those are the things that frame this piece image-wise. And I'm extremely proud of what he did. He was, and I just feel like the luckiest guy in the world to work with him. And also we had Jim Jarmusch and Peter Van Bysum doing the music, and Peter was playing the lute, which kind of sounds like a banjo. Yeah. Although he's not American, he gave me a very American sound. And then Jim Jarmusch gave us the crazy electric guitar, which is very American urban.
Yeah.
So it all feels very American to me, and and that's what American Landscapes is.
It has this feeling like Robert's the layer that Robert adds to it of he's got this almost photojournalistic
totally
feel, and it reminded me of Robert Frank's The Americans and Dorothea Lange, The Migrant Mother, and Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, and it just has this this very snapshot capture of these moments. And I think the shift between pastoral and these children's faces and riots and military and the flag, and then it's a really, really powerful layer of meaning. And also, I know that we don't have it in the video, but was there in the brief prologue, is Martha Eddy holding the People's History of the United States?
Yeah.
Howard Zinn. Yeah. I mean, there's so much just references to so many things that we're going through, but then it's this really abstract thing, and the music is just providing a kind of soundscape. It really allowed me to meditate on the performers and the choreography, and yeah, I'm interested in how you have always worked so deeply with collaborators. Your work is never just your choreography. It's the music that you choose is often commissions for your pieces. I'm thinking about Hardness 10 and the costumes with Patricia Field, and there's always your collaborations with Janine Antoni. There's so many references, and you bring so much from other worlds into your pieces. Where do you think that comes from? Are you just inspired by visual art, or?
Well, I started dancing late, so I was first a reader. That was my escape, was the page, the two-dimensional. And then when I began dancing in college, 4 years after I started dancing, I came to New York and I met Trisha Brown, and she took me to dinner that first month at Robert Rauschenberg's house. Yeah. And I tell this story a lot, so if you've heard it, excuse me. But Trisha, I was the first man in Trisha's company, and after rehearsal one day, she was like, "Oh, I'm going to dinner to Bob's house. You want to come?" And I was like, "Well, Bob who?" And she said, "Bob Rauschenberg." And I was like, "Well, who's Bob Rauschenberg?" And it was 1970. 8, I think, and so I couldn't Google him. So I had, I went to dinner kind of cold, like an idiot, and I met Robert Rauschenberg. I was looking at what was all over the place, and we were all, we had a great time drinking heavily and laughing. And then the next day I went up to the public library and figured out who he was, and I was like kind of mortified that I'm such an idiot. But I think that, and we've formed a friendship. And I think it's because I didn't know who he was, and so we were just treating each other like normal human beings.
Yeah.
But there's a history in modern and postmodern art about interdisciplinary conversation and dialogue, and you can go back to Diaghilev and Nijinsky and Stravinsky and come forward to Cunningham and Cage and Tudor with Andy Warhol and Rauschenberg, and then to Trisha Brown. So when I came into the dance world with no history at all, I started dancing, like no training at all, in college in an improvisation class, and 4 years later I'm working with Trisha Brown. So my training was that visual art and new music, that's it, that's what it is. And I didn't really have any formal training in music or choreography when I started. So that was kind of my master's degree, was working with Trisha and learning about the art world through a lot of her friends, and then then eventually became my friends and the next generations down. So also one thing I know how to do is make movement, and I cracked that mystery a long time ago. And I'm very confident about, even though I struggle with every piece, trying to find something new, I'm very confident about the fact that I understand how to make movement. And so I feel like it's okay to dare to put it against things that are equally or more powerful, so that they're in dialogue with a bigger part of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so that was definitely one of my questions. I love watching your movement. It has always been so, there's, all of the inspirations, and we will talk about that, but also it's just so itself, and I feel like I can see a clip of video and be like, yeah, that's Stevens, but it does continually invent within that. And I'm just so curious, like, how actually does movement generate from your body into the work that we see?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I am a very restless person, and there's not a lot of stillness although since I've been sheltering, I'm getting calm, and I'm getting a little slower. So I've always been very restless. I think one of my early teachers said to me, well, you're like a faucet, Stephen. It's either full on or full off.
Yeah.
And so and that was a criticism, but I took it and ran with it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be criticized by that guy. And so that became, I decided to make that part of my trademark, because I'm a stubborn guy. But I look around me a lot, and things make me have a physical response. I have one of those bodies that's a feeling body. And so when I see a painting that I love, it's not like, I don't go into an intellectual space. I go into a physical space, and I get goosebumps and hair stands up on my arms, and I have my heart beats a little faster. So I have one of those bodies that responds to the world physically. So I think that's part of it. I look at a lot of things that are both alive and inanimate. And, for American landscapes, I began looking, I've spent my life growing up in America, so it's not like I don't have a lot of images in me, but I began to look through some iconic things that I thought were more iconic, to sew them into the fabric of, I've got the stream of movement going on in my body. It's a kind of a continuum. And so I can drop different characters into that flow, and they sometimes are more prominent than others. But I was looking a lot of, when I was growing up, Muhammad Ali was gigantic to me. He was a gigantic folk hero to me. And especially because in my house there was a racial dialogue going on. Italian American middle class, lower middle class, loved him as Cassius Clay, and then were freaked out by his transition to Muhammad Ali. And of course, me being the freak of the family, I'm totally defending Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And so he needed to be there for me. Some kind of obvious images like Rosie the Riveter is in there because, the first empowered female that I knew, an image that I had when I was growing up, images like that can get sewn into a continuum that, and I try very hard never to represent, although in this piece I come dangerously close to illustrating some of these things because I felt that it was the moment to do it. So.
Yeah, but I guess there's something that is not surprising is the wrong word, but for someone like yourself who came from a very open training, the technicality, the level of, shout out to your extraordinary dancers in the piece. Your dancers, you have such an incredible eye for people, for casting, for talent, and they're all incredible movers. But it's such a highly technical body, and then there are these moments like where it feels like the body is stunted. Like I see these kind of like almost tripping, and like there's where something is blunted, or it's like this fullness, and then there's these moments of just like struggle where there's this image of Nick just sort of like tripping up a couple of times in one of his phrases where he's like,
those were accidents. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Well, the work for me, because I come from my beginnings were improvisation. I had no technical training. And then over the years, I've gone out to many ballet companies, Frankfurt Ballet and Deutsche Oper Berlin and Ballet de Lorraine. And oh my God, Yorgos is going to kill me.
Oh, Lyon
Ballet, of course. I've worked with Lyon Ballet. And so I go out and I've got a very good eye and I'm a very good thief. So I come home with all these new toys, these ballet toys in my body, and I can teach them to my dancers. So over the years, I've incorporated them into the work. But I'm very drawn because I work with energy, and my technique is basically about the transmission of energy through the body. I learned very early on that I can cast it out into space, and that relates it and aligns it to more classical work. So, because that a lot of that's about extension of energy and connection to the audience. So I do it on an energetic level, so it becomes very technical. But of course, good theater is about contrast. So, and I am a clumsy person by nature, so I love those blunt, blocky. I call them the dumb men moves. Those are so important in the context of all that beautiful elongated extension and fluidity. It's nice to like throw a rock on it once in a while.
Yeah. Well, actually, speaking of rocks, I feel like there was definitely one movement in particular in Nick's solo near the end and it probably recurred earlier than that or started earlier than that. And I just saw
he repeats that solo twice, once forward and once to the back.
And he like lifts his hands up like he's just holding the rock of Sisyphus in this like, I don't know. It just feels, the weight of it all is there. And then there's that beautiful circular dance near the end where everybody's coming out one by one and circling around and spinning. And it's just like,
well, it's a waltz. I know this is so funny because I don't really have my tradition is postmodernism. So I don't really, waltzes for me, I've always wanted to make a waltz. And so I decided I'm going to make a waltz. And they're looking at me like he's nuts. And like, why does he want to do a waltz? But, when you pepper that into the kind of confusion and chaos that I make, I find it really interesting. And, we all just want to be what we're not. So I wanted to make a waltz, and there it is.
It was so beautiful and kind of unexpected as I was watching it again, because it went from like the huge, there's like that Longo's drawing of the women's march, which transitions into this bright red flower, and everything else has been pretty muted color-wise. And then
they're all black and white except for the rose.
And then the gorgeous, like red rose. And then the company just starts spinning out in this waltz pattern. And you're just like, wait, this is the most romantic, gorgeous moment. It struck me as being like quite beautiful. And I found myself sort of like getting spun up in it. It took this very different character. It was really welcome.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm not afraid to be romantic,
Yeah.
but I do, trying to resolve a piece like that was a challenge. And uh, going from the Women's March, from that waltz, which is very romantic and spatial, it goes to a kind of an awkward section where each dancer gets lifted by the group.
Yes.
And they're not fancy lifts. They're just like lift each person up. And it seemed like way too unsophisticated for my group, but I don't know. It just felt like the right thing to do, so we did it.
Yeah.
And that's how I make dances. I don't really. I mean, I have all sorts of plans, but structurally, I really try to let the dance talk to me and let me know structurally and emotionally where it needs to go. And that's what it kept telling me to do. So that's what I did. And,
yeah. I mean, I really love that aspect of your work. I feel like you work so much with partnering, and I did note that circle turned into this like full group partnering where people were just supporting each other and lifting each other. And then there's also those moments where the whole company lines up and is in a line and holding hands and like sort of pulling and losing people or falling. And there's just such great kinesthetic connection that you really move the energy like
that's my favorite moment. I know. And Robert chose to put the there's a sequence of glass that's been shattered by bullet holes.
Yes.
And these are my dancers. I love my dancers. And to put bullet holes through glass above them, I mean, it makes me want to scream. That but I mean, I have to say, working with Robert and watching him begin to bring scenography to the various sections of the work, that whole process was such a pleasure. And that, I knew I wanted those bullet holes very badly, but I wasn't sure how to use them. And of course, they're heavy.
Yeah.
The heavy thing to put in, and the dancers at that point are all holding hands, trying to move together to go, and they keep changing directions as a group. So they're kind of like, in a riot, trying to go, trying to like get out. Yeah. And it was, it's very challenging to put your dancers through that kind of thing. And a lot of the times they don't know what I'm thinking or what's gonna be behind them. In this piece, I talked about it with them more, and I showed them the images because I didn't want them to be freaked out by some of what they saw.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was that, there was so many nice moments of like connection and holding, and softness. Like at some point I looked at the floor and there were just those two couples who were lying together against the juxtaposition of these massive images that Robert, it was a really beautiful, were you and Robert in a lot of discussion about?
Oh yeah.
I noted also that the Jill Brienza curated.
Well, Jill
as a curator.
Yeah, Jill was instrumental in allowing that whole thing to happen. I've met Robert over the years, but I was kind of nervous to ask him. Yeah. And Jill was like, let me take care of it. So Jill got us together and he was like, absolutely, I'd love to do it. And so, Jill did a massive amount of research, and together Jill and I put together some stuff. And then we went to Robert, and then Robert looked at a sequence and, and then he had the video. And so Robert was super engaged. And when you go to someone like Robert Longo, you don't, he's like got other things on his mind besides making a dance for no money. But he was so generous and so sweet, and spent so much time and took it really seriously. And I was like, look, Robert, I can make this as easy as possible for you. Jill could put him in sequence, or Jill and I could do it. And he was like, look, I'm doing this and I'm going to do it. So like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be involved. And so, he was great. He was really great about it. But one of the things I wanted to say, getting back to the photojournalism, he takes these moments that you might find in a newspaper and he blows them up to this enormous scale. The actual drawings are enormous, they're like 2 stories, 1 story, 2 story high. And so these moments that you pass by in the course of a day in the newspaper become these operatic moments, and often they're, you get immune to them in the newspaper, but when you see them blown up on that scale, they become incredibly powerful. And it just, for me, it worked perfect. It was a perfect counterpoint to the movement and the kind of movement studies that we were doing.
Yeah, I wrote down just like cosmos and like grandeur, and it just felt operatic is the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
It's just, he elevates these moments of just this like perfect slice snapshot of the world, but then juxtaposed against like the whole earth and the sky, and like he's really like, you guys are both just like zooming in and out and in and out in this way that's really it's just so effective. It was a really great collaboration.
Well, it's part of why I wanted to show it a second year in a row, and I felt that it needed to come to the Joyce, and it needed to be at the audience that has seen all my work over the years. I felt like the work deserved a second chance. And back in the older days, I used to do every work that way because my work is so dense, and I used to always do it twice in a row, and invariably people would understand it more the second year. And I stopped doing that for a while, and I felt with this piece it would have been the right thing to do. Very sad that it's not going to be there.
Yeah. A really, I think, great opportunity to talk about the Joyce season a bit. One of the things that I wanted to bring up both within your piece and the way that you're looking at the past, and in some ways your own American biography, and the ways that Robert is also putting the visual world in history and timeline. You've done so much work around acknowledging ancestry and roots and lineage with the Bloodlines program. And I feel like we were having a new Bloodlines, which was a new direction for the Bloodlines program.
Bloodlines future.
Yes. And I would just love to hear just more about the impetus to launch Bloodlines at all, and your desire to name ancestors.
Sure. Well, so Merce died, and then Trisha Brown, my mentor, the woman I loved, the artist that I loved so much and was so lucky to be so intimately involved with over the years. They both left the earth around the same time, and it made me just wonder what I wanted to do with my own life. And did I see myself, not that I'm comparing myself to them as an artist, but did I see that same trajectory for me? And Merce was 90 and he still had the company going, and did I want to get involved? I don't know. What do I want? And so I decided what I wanted to do was to crack open the idea of what I think a company is, and to frame what I'm doing with the voices that have inspired me. And so in one way, I'm sharing my resources with these artists, and they're mostly from Merce Cunningham to the postmodern Judson people that I grew up around, who I knew personally mostly. And in one ways, I'm sharing my resources with them. In the other hand, I'm framing my work in relationship to theirs. And in the other hand, I'm giving a chance for new audiences to see work that was instrumental to the way I think, but maybe they haven't had a chance to see the work. So there were multiple layers, and I just felt like, wow, like, am I supposed to be doing this? And I felt like after that initial year of being nervous, or the initial moment of being nervous about the idea, it just seemed to make the most sense. And it's been so rich for me to be able to re-examine some works that I've loved, and to actually have the dancers embody them, and to have my dancers are like doctors of postmodernism now. They've been through 5 years, 11 dances, from Merce Cunningham to Trisha Brown to Steve Paxton to Rudy Perez to Anna Halpern to Yvonne Rainer. I mean, they've gotten it all, and these are the things that I grew up around, and now my hands are like getting crazy. Now they've embodied that work, sometimes more willingly than others, but they will go away as doctors of embodied postmodern and I'm very, very proud of that. And also, part of it was just watching the way the world runs and watching the trajectory of my own company going up and down, when it's popular, when it's not popular, when we're touring a lot, and reading about it, reading what people have to say about me. I just felt like seizing the narrative myself,
Mm-hmm.
and curating how I wanted you to look at these works in relationship to my work, and as well as have the gift of seeing these crazy, beautiful works. So I've been mostly working with historical things that have influenced me deeply. And then I realized, well, there's a couple of advantages to getting older. I'm 64 now. And one of them is that you can help other people. So I thought about maybe looking at what's coming next down the road in relationship to bloodlines. And so at the same time, I found I'm up at the Petronio Residency Center up in Round Top, New York. I found at this retreat that is where we give awards to artists just to work and make new work. So it's about the next generation here. And so I somehow, I hadn't made the jump to put that into my company. And this season at the Joyce, I realized that I could actually commission one of the next generation to make a solo for themselves and put it on my stage and introduce that person to your audience and to my audience at the Joyce. So I chose Johnny Cruz Mercer, who had a residency up here a couple of years ago. It was a co-residency with Dance Space and I.
Uh-huh.
And I met Johnny and I fell in love with him. The minute I saw him working in the studio, he blew me away. And I felt very close to him historically. What he was doing with his body felt like it had a relationship to me in some way. And he's a kind and generous and crazy, beautiful mover. So I thought, well, I'm going to introduce him to the Joyce audience by asking him to make his own work. So he made a solo called, so we commissioned it. He made a solo called Shadow Prince. And so for the first time ever on the Joyce stage, we were going to have him, somebody else premiere one of their works in the middle of my concert. So it was a big moment for us. And Johnny will be doing it. He'll be releasing a video now, because now that we're in lockdown, in shelter mode, he'll be doing a video, and I think he's going to do it out in one of the parks up in Hamilton Heights towards the end of the month. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's been one of the harder things to grapple with, those moments that were planned for younger artists to make their debuts this spring at the Joyce. Oh. We will work hard to get that back, but yeah, I mean, I think that there has been this aspect both with the Bloodlines program and certainly with Bloodlines Future and the Petronio Residency Center about just this giving back, this passing the torch forward, the sharing of resources. It's a place of such generosity. It feels like, there aren't many other structures like this that exist in our field.
Well, I don't think that having a normal dance company works that well anymore. And also, I've been doing it for 36 years, and I'm an Aries, and I get it's like, what's next? And so, so looking at Trisha and Merce, thinking, is that going to be like, am I going to be like at the end of this life, and it's going to be, I don't know what it's going to be. What I want it to be is inclusive. I want there to be a lot of people around. I want to see what's happening. You say it's generous, but I'm a very selfish person, because I get to having the historical works in my repertoire is like having masterpieces on my walls. Yeah. And so how generous is that? I feel really lucky. And then to be able to have all these, to look at what the next generation of artists is doing. And I don't hang around too much when they're working unless they invite me up in the studio here. But when they do invite me, I'm blown away and I'm inspired and I'm re-educated about what's happening. And, I feel like, language keeps changing. And if I can't speak it, I'm out. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's kind of selfish, but
yeah. Well, it also like it whether or not it feels also selfish, I appreciate that. But it has this level of like introduction. I had never seen Rudy's work before last year, and that
I'm
solo
glad you got that.
was just like it was just like that felt like a gift. Like this, you know, what other world is it that you're putting these resources into a very, very detailed reconstruction, giving performers, like it's also a gift to the performer because
Oh yeah. And these are not easy. And and the ones that are alive, the directors that are alive that I'm working with are not easy. And the process, you know, I mean, Rudy was in another city and he couldn't travel. So, you know, none of it's easy. There'll be a book about this at some point because it's, you know, very challenging.
yeah.
And, but this year we were going to do a reconstruction of, so Paxton had a work that he did with Rauschenberg in the 60s called Jag vill göra una telefonera. And it's a duet made of a series of, so I want to make a telephone call. That's the translation. A series of sports photos stuck on a poster board or make a score that the dancers follow. So in the 80s, Steve came to myself and when I was in Trisha Brown's company, and another dancer, Randy Warshaw, who was in Trisha Brown's company, who had, you know, we had both started as contact improvisers in college. So he knew us and he came to us and he said, would you like to do this? And so he gave us the score, didn't give us too much more detail about it. And we made this piece, and he never came to a rehearsal because he was traveling, and he came at opening night at Dance Space. It was a Judson homage back in the 80s. And so he and Rauschenberg show up to the dress rehearsal and I'm like dying. And, you know, he didn't say much, but last year I went to him and I asked him if we could do a reconstruction of the piece that Randy and I did. And also I gave the score to my dancers. I coupled my dancers together and they all made their own versions. This year for you at the Joyce, we were doing the Petronio Warshaw version from the 80s, which I'm super proud of. You know, it was kind of like a Polaroid from my past. Remember Polaroids?
Yeah.
So it's like a Polaroid, the kind that you squeegee down with that crazy liquid. It's kind of like that for me. And so I was very proud to present that along with, you know, The Rite of Spring, along with American Landscapes, and then Shadow Prints by Johnny Mercer. I mean, I thought very hard to give you a killer program this year.
So you were saying that it's sometimes hard to work with the living artists who are reconstructing.
Well, the dead ones are much quieter.
Yeah. How is it though when you're reconstructing your own work, especially with like Full Half Wrong? What's what made you want to pull that back out now?
Well, there's a lot of thought that goes into these decisions. And let me just say, I write these dances on the dancers. A lot of times I don't remember the steps, and I'm all about the next step. And so I depend heavily on the talent of my dancers to talk to each other across the generations, and also to look at the video. This generation, I mean, my company right now they're so good at looking at video and learning stuff. And you know, by the way, there wasn't, you know, I was just the beginning of having videotape when I started my dancing career. So these kids are like, you know, they're raised on it. So they're really good at it. And why did I choose that? I didn't want to make a new piece this year because there were a lot of reasons. Some of them were economic. We had a very difficult blowout 35th anniversary, but a very difficult financial year. And there were some other factors. And I just thought after 35 years, do I want to just jump into the next thing, or do I want to step back and look and see? Mm-hmm. And so I decided to step back, but of course I want to give you guys work, and I want the dancers to be able to perform. And so I looked at The Rite of Spring, which was made in the early 90s. And it was a period when I was doing a lot of ballet commissions. And so I was really sucking up the information, the ballet vocabulary, not the syntax, but the words of ballet, the steps of ballet were I had a lot of access to them, and I was taking it home and incorporating it into the flow of my own movement making. And so that represents a certain moment where that was pretty high pitched. And it was also that score is like the most punk rock. The Stravinsky score is the most punk rock score I could imagine. It's like Stravinsky's like hammering the piano, and we used the Simon Rattle version, which is so beautiful. And I chose it because I thought the dancers would be technically challenged by it. It's a very, very hard dance.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be fluid and released, and you have to have petit allegro, and you have to have very quick feet and very high extensions, and you have to be mean and fluid because the movement kind of mean. So it's also the Virgin's, the dance ends with the Virgin's sacrifice, which I find to be, I did at the time, and I still do, the most crazy thing. And everybody, and at that period, everybody was doing these rites of springs, and no one was saying how ridiculous it was to have to kill a virgin to grow crops. I mean, that's like anthropologically, very, very troubling concept.
Yeah.
So, those of you who know me know that I've tried to embrace the sexuality of my life in my movement. And so I made a solo for the Virgin, who is definitely not a virgin. She's an empowered sexual female who's killing the space. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it was a good time to re-show that. And I've got Jackie Medlock, who has been with me for 10 years. She's at a point where she's got the wisdom in her body to knock that out of the park. So I wanted to do it for her too. So
yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good place to stop asking you questions about it. I do want to acknowledge that both of us work in live performance, that we've dedicated our lives and careers to being in rooms with other people, sharing work with audiences, and that the audience to dancer connection of hearing those people breathing and the thump of their feet on the floor is everything to our work. And I know that this is something that you're also grappling with and passionate about, that we share American landscapes as a method of putting work into people's brains, but that it is not in any way a representation of what it feels like to be in the room. It's
not. And we are still alive, although silenced for the moment. We will be back. The society gathers, and dancing is so much about gathering. It's in groups for other groups. And so, we will be back. Right now, I'm thinking of this as like we're all out in some space mission in our individual capsules, and we will land at some point in the future.
Yeah. Well, I guess congratulations on the program that you put together. It was one of the really exciting moments for us this spring. And I know that we're working together to build it back for a very soon future. But happy opening night.
Thank you so much. I love talking with you about it.
Thanks for taking time to share. I know we've hung out a few times in different forms, and you've been working with the Joyce for a very, very long time. And it's we look forward to working with you more and again as soon as we can.
Well, I miss every one of you, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, great. Well, take good care. Thanks again.
You too.
And love to the Petronio family.
Vice versa. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye.